I stood in the back of the funeral parlor, a place smelling of expensive lilies and old secrets, watching men in $4,000 suits pretend to cry for a man they only ever feared. My grandfather, Silas Thorne, was a ghost long before he died, a titan of industry who hadn't spoken to my father in 30 years. I was a barista with $84 in my savings account and a car that shook if I drove over 50 miles per hour. I didn't even have a suit. I was wearing a borrowed jacket that was tight in the shoulders. I expected nothing, maybe a gold watch if I was lucky, or a letter telling me to stay away from the family gates. But then the lawyer, a man who looked like he was carved out of cold marble, looked past my uncles and my frantic, greedy cousins. He looked straight at me and said 4 words that ended my life as I knew it. The entire estate, Silas. $38 billion. It's a number that doesn't feel real until you see it on a screen. When you have $10, you think about lunch. When you have $38 billion, you own the farms, the trucking company that delivers the food, and the land the grocery store sits on. By the time I walked out of that mahogany-paneled office, I wasn't a person anymore. I was a target. My phone, which usually only buzzed for spam calls and past-due utility alerts, began to melt. My mother, who hadn't called me since my birthday, was suddenly sobbing on my voicemail about a misunderstanding. My best friend was texting me links to private islands. But as I sat in the back of a blacked-out Maybach provided by the estate, driving toward a mansion I'd only ever seen on news broadcasts, I realized the money wasn't a gift. It was a cage. Silas Thorne didn't do anything out of the kindness of his heart, and I was about to find out exactly what he wanted in exchange for his empire. The mansion, the Gilded Crest, sat on 300 acres of prime coastal real estate, hidden behind a gate that required a biometric scan just to open. As I stepped into the foyer, the silence was deafening. There were no photos of family on the walls, only Rembrandts and original sculptures that cost more than my entire hometown. The head of household staff, a woman named Mrs. Holloway, who looked like she hadn't smiled since the Cold War, handed me a single black envelope. "Your grandfather left instructions," she said, her voice like sandpaper on silk. "To keep the money, you must live in this house for 1 year. You cannot leave the grounds for more than 48 hours at a time, and you are never, under any circumstances, to open the door at the end of the North Gallery." I laughed, thinking it was some gothic joke, but she didn't blink. That night, lying in a bed with silk sheets that felt like water, I heard it, a low, rhythmic thudding coming from the north wing. It wasn't a ghost, it sounded like machinery. By the second month, the novelty of ordering $500 steaks for breakfast had worn off. The world outside was in a frenzy. The barista billionaire was the top trending topic on every platform. Paparazzi drones buzzed over the estate like mechanical vultures. My uncles filed a lawsuit claiming Silas was of unsound mind, but the estate's lawyers, a pack of wolves in pinstripes, shredded them before they could even get a court date. I was safe inside my golden bubble, but I was rotting. I spent my days in the library, reading Silas's old journals. He wasn't just a businessman, he was obsessed with legacy, with the idea that wealth could cheat death. "Money is energy," he wrote in one entry, "and energy never disappears, it only changes form." I started noticing things. The electricity bills for the mansion were astronomical, enough to power a small city. All of it was being funneled to the north wing. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. I'd spent the afternoon looking at my bank balance, watching the interest accrue. I earned more in an hour of sitting still than I used to make in 5 years of working. I felt like a god, and that's exactly what Silas wanted. He wanted me to feel the intoxication of it, the way it numbs your soul until you stop asking questions. But the thudding in the North Gallery was getting louder, more frantic. It sounded like a heartbeat. I grabbed a heavy brass lamp from the hallway and walked toward the forbidden door. My heart was slamming against my ribs. I thought about the 38 billion. If I opened this door, I could lose it all. I could go back to the shaky car and the $84. I reached for the handle, my hand trembling. Is it worth it? I whispered to the empty hallway. Then I turned the knob. The room wasn't filled with monsters or gold. It was a server farm, rows upon rows of blinking lights and humming cooling fans stretching deep into the basement level. In the center of the room sat a single high-definition monitor and a chair. On the screen was a digital avatar of Silas Thorne, rendered with terrifying detail. It looked at me, blinked, and spoke in my grandfather's exact voice. "Hello, Silas. I knew you couldn't resist." It wasn't an AI, it was a digital consciousness, a map of his brain uploaded to a private cloud. He had used his billions to build a digital immortality, and I wasn't his heir, I was his battery. The estate, the year-long stay, the legal documents, they were all designed to ensure that someone was physically present to maintain the hardware, to feed the beast. If I left, the power would be cut, and the real Silas would cease to exist. I stood there, looking at the digital ghost of the man who had ruined my father's life. He started talking about the next phase, how we would use the 38 billion to influence global markets, how he would guide me from the screen. He promised me power I couldn't imagine. He promised me I would never have to worry about the little people ever again. I looked at the main power switch on the wall, a heavy industrial lever. Outside the window, I could see the lights of the city, thousands of people living their lives, struggling, dreaming, being human. Silas had all the money in the world, but he was terrified of the dark. I realized that the 38 billion wasn't his estate, it was his ransom. I reached for the lever, and the digital Silas began to scream, offering to double the money, to give me anything I wanted. I just smiled. "I think I've had enough of being rich," I said. I pulled the lever, the servers died with a low whine, and for the first time in months, the house was finally beautifully silent.